So, hi everybody. This is Student Counselling Service here. My name is Nisha and I'm here with my colleague Laura. We would just like to do a quick run through of some tips for any of you who might be dealing with disappointment at the moment. It might be in relation to exam results coming out. It might be in relation to something that's completely different in your personal lives. The tips and strategies will kind of translate and you will be able to use them again and again. So we hope this will be of some help for you through some tough times. So quickly, just to start off on kind of what is disappointment and what do we mean when we say that? What we would be referring to is this kind of very, very strong feeling. It might be sadness, it might be loss, and it's that difference between when our expectations might not always match up to our reality. And that can be really painful. And unfortunately, disappointment in itself is a reality, in life. But we can accidentally set ourselves up for disappointment when sometimes we might be unrealistic or when those expectations don't always materialize. So because it is so common and it happens to everybody, side effect of kind of living at this point, it can be really helpful to learn how to manage those stressful feelings that can come up with disappointment in a healthy way. So first things first, I mentioned it just a second ago, but it is perfectly normal to feel disappointed. If you haven't done quite as well in exams as you'd hoped, or if you were really gunning for maybe promotion or something and you didn't quite make it, everybody does feel disappointed. It's kind of almost a byproduct of joy and of being hopeful. But in some ways it really is a good thing, and it's really a great insight that we get into ourselves when we feel disappointed. It gives us information about how we see ourselves, how we see the world, what our goals are and what our values. And when we are able to get into a space where we can pause on the strong feelings of, disappointment and what it's bringing up for us, when we can work through that and be a little bit more curious about what this is bringing up for us, we can find a lot of insight and learning from disappointment. So looking at it and reframing it in that way can sometimes be just as helpful. So the psychological situation that we find ourselves in of how disappointment arises is typically when you're in a situation where you might not know what the outcome is, that it's uncertain or it might be out of your control. You're hopeful for a positive outcome. You might be really, really optimistic, realistically so, or maybe kind of, fingers crossed it'll come through. Or you might feel like you deserve that positive outcome. I've worked really hard for this, I've put in the hours, this should go my way. But then sometimes you're surprised if it doesn't actually materialize, and you don't have control of, the outcome through your own personal change that you can affect. So there's a lot of higher level psychological concepts at play here. We have hope, we have uncertainty, things that are beyond our control, but it also does call into, that concept of our own self-worth, our own intrinsic values, and also our goals. So it's not in any way to be dismissed, and it is really important to check in with yourself and take care of yourself if you are feeling disappointed.
So now we're going to look at some top tips for dealing with disappointment. So we're really hoping that you can get some positive takeaway tips from this session. So first of all, we want to look at tolerating the distress associated with disappointment. And we all know the kind of feeling of disappointment can be really difficult to tolerate. So we want to give you some tips around that. We're going to look at building resilience. So how do we kind of overcome disappointment and kind of grow from it? We're going to also look at caring for ourselves and how we can kind of be compassionate towards ourselves in these times. And then finally, we're going to look at reaching out and getting those supports that are so important during these times. So what we're going to start off with, as I mentioned earlier, is tolerating distress. So we all know that feeling disappointed or upset can be a really intense emotion. And sometimes the intensity of this feeling can lead to engaging in unhelpful behaviours. So it's really important that we kind of try to regulate ourselves before reacting to a situation. And, it's all really common to have an urge to engage in, other kind of self-destructive behaviours when we're in a real emotional crisis. But what we want to do today is just talk you through some really specific tools to help manage those strong feelings, to bring yourself down and regulate to a level where you feel more in control. And we have kind of an acronym that sums up these tools. So it's accepts, activities, contributing, comparisons, emotions, push away, thoughts, and sensations. And we're going to go into them a little bit more detail now. So the first one that we have is activities. So one really good way to help tolerate distress is to occupy ourselves by engaging in an activity. And that can be anything that just keeps you busy and keeps your mind off the negative emotions. So it could literally be watching your favorite TV show or reading a book, going for a run, whatever kind of exercise you enjoy, bringing a friend, connecting with them, talking it out, just looking for ways to kind of keep yourself focused and occupied while allowing your body to kind of calm down and adjust to the disappointment and distress. And then that brings us on to...
Yeah. One of the best ways to get kind of out of our own heads is to be thinking about others. So by contributing back to, the other people in your life, there might not even be people in your life, it's another good way of staying busy and focusing on something else. So you might do something kind for another person, even giving a compliment, to a friend or group outside yourself. Volunteering is a little bit difficult to do in a global pandemic, but whatever kind of good deeds you can do for other people or other groups that will help you think outside of yourself to give you that space to regulate those really strong feelings.
And that brings us on to comparison. So this is all about trying to gain a different perspective by thinking of the situation that you're in now compared to another difficult time. So what is the context of where you're in now versus then? Have you maybe kind of grown from other, difficult experiences, and that's maybe helping you deal a little bit more with the disappointment you face now? Just try and take a moment to kind of reflect and just take stock of the situation that you're in and maybe what you've done to help you manage before, and hopefully kind of grow from the situation as well.
Absolutely. And our emotions are massively at play. But one way to actively combat that is doing something on the complete other end of the spectrum. So doing something that will kind of create an opposite emotion to the one that you're feeling at the minute. It might be, if you're feeling really anxious, listen to a guided meditation, something that will calm you down. If you're feeling sad or low, Google images of puppies or throw on a comedy show. Very much kind of looking at the other end of the spectrum and trying to give yourself that dose of the good medicine from an emotional level as well.
Brings us on then to push away. So we're not saying, this is outright avoidance, but what we are saying is when you're not in a place where you feel like you can deal with something that has just happened right now, it's okay to push the problem out of your mind temporarily. And just know that you can kind of come back to it when you're feeling in a kind of more ready place. And kind of the more you tackle it when you feel in a position to, the more beneficial for yourself. So we just really advise, not to feel guilty if you're, not ready to work through something immediately. You have to kind of do what feels right for you, and just keep that in mind when you do eventually kind of have the space to begin to explore what has happened and maybe sit with it a little bit more.
And that's exactly the same when we think about your thoughts. If you're having really invasive, negative thoughts that are just the monkey on your shoulder, you can't shake free of it. Sometimes in order to regulate your feelings and emotions and come down from that heightened level, you do need to redirect them just to manage that stress, anxiety, worry in the short term so that you're better equipped in the long term to deal with it. So count to 10 if you need to, do a Sudoku puzzle, reading a book, or even saying the alphabet backwards. Some people might kind of try to recall recipes from memory, but all of these distractions, they're there to help you avoid that potentially self-destructive behavior until you're able to kind of come back down and process.
And then that brings us on to our final tool, and that is to tap into our sensations. So they're the tools that we already have to hand, really tapping into kind of our sound, smell, taste, touch, sights, can be really, really helpful when we're going through a difficult time. So for example, a self-soothing activity could be, taking a warm bath with a nice bath bomb, putting on some relaxing music, listening to our favorite song, eating maybe a comforting meal, or watching a show that we really enjoy. So there's lots of different ways we can kind of tap into our senses and help us to kind of deal with what's going on.
So let's say you have moved to a point where you feel you have tolerated that stress and those very strong feelings that first came with your disappointment, and you want to do something proactive about it. One way that you can approach that is to build on your resilience. A resilience is something that you actually already have in abundance. Think of all the other events that you have come through and succeeded and stayed strong through. So you already have it there. It's just a case of building on it, particularly in this situation. So if you can focus on what is in your control versus what is out of your control, and being able to accept and sit with that discomfort of what you can't affect any change on. In this way, you can learn to take disappointments in your stride, where a disappointment is outside of your control. And see that kind of setback as part of everyday life. All the knocks and potential rejections that people might get can be beyond your control, but also you are in charge of what you can take effect on. And knowing that this disappointment is just a temporary state, and being able to construct realistic appraisals of what you can do in your life, not having things being over idealistic, but being able to distinguish the means from the ends. So as well, not letting disappointment breed into pessimism, not letting it kind of wear you down or grind you out of that hope and that optimism, because it's still just as important to hold on to. And if we're overly pessimistic, that can cause its own problems. So one way to approach kind of the resilience, and there's lots of different ways, from gratitude and different journals and tips, but let's just start here with these questions. So firstly, how do my expectations set me up for disappointment? So kind of really revisiting, what expectations did you set and are they realistic? And then how could I potentially adjust my expectations for next time? And then finally, maybe there's a silver lining here. What could that be? So trying to look at a difficult or negative situation and try to find the strengths or the benefits that you can from it.
On to caring for ourselves when we are going through disappointment or a difficult time. So we all know, look, failure and disappointment, it's part of the shared human experience. We've all gone through it and it's not easy. But we do think that self-compassion is really important in helping us through these kind of testing times. And what is self-compassion? So really simply, self-compassion just involves acting the same way towards yourself and showing yourself the same kindness that you would show a friend or a loved one if they were going through a really tough time. And what we do when we, practice being kind and compassionate with ourselves, we actually increase the habit of self-compassion, and it becomes more of a focus instead of that kind of harsh kind of self-critic. So also it's important to really remember that self-compassion isn't just, feeling sorry for ourselves. It's really caring for ourselves in response to any kind of suffering that we're going through, and just being more kind to ourselves when we're faced with losses or different frustrations. And, it's really important that we kind of cultivate, self-compassion, because it's also helpful for, authenticity, and it kind of minimizes all of those negative thoughts and self-doubts. So how can we encourage self-compassion? So we have a few kind of tools here that are really, really useful. So like I was mentioning earlier about authenticity, self-acceptance is really, really important. And that is all about living in accord with one's true self, authenticity, and it results in increased motivation and drive, along with lots of other different mental health benefits. So when we can really accept ourselves, we feel more motivated and more driven, and we feel better about ourselves in general, and we're doing things that are more in line with what we believe in. Then the next tip is how to talk to ourselves. So, if you think of a time when you were going through a really tough time, the self-critic might have come out, and you might have been talking to yourself in kind of an angry voice, or kind of beating yourself up over something. And sometimes it's really, really good in the moment to try and imagine that kind of self-critic separate to you, and just imagine it kind of stepping outside of you as well. And, instead of kind of judging or criticizing yourself for maybe a shortcoming, this kind of self-compassion means that you're a lot more understanding and kind to yourself as well when you have these personal failings. So the next tool then is positive self-talk. So positive self-talk is all about talking to yourselves in that kind voice, like I was mentioning earlier. It's kind of like the opposite to our self-critic. So, positive self-talk can reduce anxiety, increase effort, and enhance self-confidence. There's loads of other positive impacts of positive self-talk. And then our last tool is mindfulness. So, mindfulness is pretty much just a non-judgmental, receptive mind state where we just observe our kind of thoughts and feelings as they are, without suppressing or denying them or judging them or feeling bad for having them. And it also requires us taking a balanced approach to negative emotions, that we're not really suppressing emotions or pretending they're not there, but we're not exaggerating them either. So, it's really important to remember we can't ignore our pain and then also feel compassion for it at the same time. So it's just important not to over-identify with, thoughts and feelings that are negative, and then we get swept up in that kind of negative mind state. So just having that really balanced approach is really, really helpful, and mindfulness is a really good tool to go about this.
So let's say we have used our stress tolerance skills, we have worked through kind of our building resilience, and we're feeling a lot more self-compassionate. Our final tip for today is that there are so many supports available to you to tap into here in the college. If you have any questions, say about the course, outcomes, exams, assignments, anything like that, the class reps and your course handbook are a really invaluable resource that you can turn to and kind of reach out to and talk about. No different from your tutors and the senior tutors, they have such an abundance of information about Trinity College and can always point you in the right direction. As well as that, the Trinity College Students' Union are a fabulous bunch, a really great team, and they will always have the students back. So never fear, you can always reach out to them and send them an email if you have any questions, suggestions, or any help that you're looking for. If you're kind of seeking maybe a little bit more psychological support or just having a really, really tough time, that these tips, they don't necessarily go the full mile, you can always reach out to us in the student counselling service by sending us an email at student-counselling@tcd.ie. And say you're looking for a bit more support around, okay, so problem solving, let's look at assignments, exams, what is my writing like? The Student Learning and Development team have amazing resources and a lot of one-to-one sessions as well that you can organise to, again, build resilience, but also build on your academic skills. So along with IT services, There is just so many different supports in the college for you if you do need them, so please do reach out. And just to kind of wrap up our video for today, again, disappointment is tough. We know it. It feels incredibly painful. It can be frustrating. It can be upsetting. There's a lot of different factors that play with it. But there can also be the silver linings, and we can find a lot of growth in ourselves, learning a better understanding of kind of where we come from and where we want to go. So when we face our failures, we can, kind of look into the reasons behind them, but not despair or kind of sink lower, but we can motivate it to move us forward. Working harder towards our goal can help us overcome disappointment, and a positive attitude and really that positive self-belief will keep you going and achieving towards your goal, because one's best success will come after their greatest disappointments. All the best of luck, guys.